The council chamber fell silent as Emperor Varrock entered. Every Draconid present lowered their heads in submission. Their emperor moved like a mountain-given form, scales dark as deep space, eyes burning with cold fire that had witnessed 3,000 years of galactic history. He took his place on the obsidian throne without a word. Emotion was weakness. Weakness was death. This truth had guided the Draconid Empire since before most species in the galaxy had discovered fire. Rindax, chief advisor and keeper of Imperial records, approached with measured steps. His clawed hands held a data tablet that glowed with soft blue light. The information displayed would determine the fate of entire worlds, yet his face remained perfectly still. To show concern would be to invite disgrace. Your Eternal Majesty, the conquest of the Pelian system proceeds as calculated. Their resistance collapsed within the predicted time frame. Casualties among our forces remain within acceptable parameters. Rindax spoke in the flat, emotionless tone that all Draconids mastered from childhood. The ability to feel had not been bred out of their species, merely buried so deep that most forgot it existed at all. Varrock gave the slightest nod. Another system added to the Empire. Another species learning to live under Draconid rule. The mathematics of conquest were simple and elegant. Apply overwhelming force. Eliminate leadership. Establish order. He had performed these calculations so many times that they required no thought. The subjugated population will be integrated according to standard protocols, Varrock said. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Ensure their productive capacity reaches optimal levels within 2 standard cycles. It will be done, Eternal One. Rindax bowed and stepped back, but he did not leave. Something else required the Emperor's attention. Something unusual enough to break standard reporting procedure. Varrock waited. Time meant little to one who had ruled for 3 millennia. There is an anomaly at the edge of Imperial space, Rindax continued. A vessel of unknown origin has appeared near the outer reach stations. Scans indicate no weapon systems, no military configuration, no logical purpose for its presence in this sector. For the first time in many years, Varrock felt something that might have been curiosity. He crushed the sensation immediately. Curiosity led to questions. Questions led to doubt. Doubt was weakness. Classification, he asked. Unknown, Eternal One. The ship's design matches no recorded species in Imperial databases. Initial analysis suggests biological origins. Single life form aboard. The vessel transmits continuously, but not on standard communication frequencies. What does it transmit? Rindax hesitated. The pause lasted less than a second, but for a Draconid trained to show no reaction, it spoke volumes. Our analysts are uncertain. The transmissions follow organized patterns, but convey no tactical data. No demands, no threats. The patterns repeat but vary in complex ways that suggest purpose without obvious meaning. Varrock rose from his throne. Around the chamber, his council members went rigid. The Emperor rarely moved during routine sessions. Movement implied that something mattered. Nothing was supposed to matter beyond the Empire's expansion and the maintenance of order. Bring the vessel to Draconis Majora, Varrock commanded. Intact. I will examine this anomaly personally. The council chamber erupted in barely suppressed shock. Rindax's eyes widened a fraction before he controlled himself. The Emperor had not personally overseen first contact with an unknown species in over 1,000 years. Such matters were delegated to specialists. For Varrock to take direct interest was unprecedented. Your Eternal Majesty, surely this task is beneath your attention. Allow the Military Research Division to— Are you questioning my judgment, Rindax? The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. Varrock's eyes fixed on his chief advisor with the weight of ages. Never, Eternal One. Forgive my presumption. Rindax lowered his head fully, exposing his neck in complete submission. The vessel will be brought to the capital system immediately. Varrock returned to his throne. The momentary disruption to routine had already been forgotten by most present. They would file this away as another example of the Emperor's inscrutable wisdom. They would not wonder why he had chosen to act. To wonder was to feel. To feel was forbidden, but Varrock knew something they did not. Something he had not shared with anyone in living memory. For 3,000 years, he had been alone. Not physically alone. The Empire held trillions of beings, but alone in the silence of his own mind. The conditioning that turned draconids into perfect servants of order had taken something from him. Something he had not realized was missing until he heard about these strange transmissions from the unknown vessel, the patterns. The organized sound waves that conveyed no tactical information. Something about them called to a part of himself he had buried so deeply he had forgotten it existed. In his youth, before the final conditioning, before he became emperor, he had been different. The memories were distant and faded, but they persisted like ghosts. He had felt things, wanted things, dreamed things. Then he had become what the Empire needed him to be. A perfect machine of conquest and order. Immortal, eternal. Empty.as the council dispersed, and his advisors filed out in silent precision. Varrock remained on his throne. His private chambers awaited, vast and cold and decorated with treasures from 1,000 conquered worlds. Beautiful things that he looked at but did not see. Valuable things that meant nothing. The unknown vessel would arrive within days. Perhaps it held weapons after all, some trick his scanners could not detect. Perhaps it was a trap. Perhaps it was nothing. But perhaps, in the organized patterns of those mysterious transmissions, there was something else entirely. Something he could not name because he had no words for it anymore. Something that made the weight of 3,000 years feel suddenly, unbearably heavy. Varrock dismissed the thought. Emotion was weakness. Weakness was death. The Empire had endured because he had endured. Cold, calculating, perfect. Yet as he sat alone in the empty chamber, he found himself waiting for news of the vessel's arrival with something that felt almost like anticipation. David Reed adjusted the final tuning peg on his guitar and watched through the viewport as the massive warships surrounded his small vessel. Each Draconid battlecruiser could have swallowed the Odyssey whole. Their weapons systems glowed with enough power to crack planets. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt calm. Maybe even a little excited. 2 years ago, he had left Earth with a simple goal: bring music to anyone who would listen. Not as a diplomat or a scientist. Not as part of some grand human expansion plan. Just as himself. A musician who believed that somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, there had to be others who understood that beauty mattered. That connection mattered. That the universe was more than just survival and mathematics. His wife would have loved this moment. She always said he had too much faith in people, in beings, in the idea that art could bridge any gap. The memory brought a familiar ache, but he smiled through it. Grief and joy lived together in music. That was the whole point. The hull shuddered as a tractor beam locked onto the Odyssey. External speakers crackled to life with a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed. Unknown vessel. You have entered Draconid Imperial space without authorization. Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in immediate destruction. David reached for the communication panel. No resistance here, friends. Come on aboard. Door S unlocked. Silence answered him. Then the crackling voice returned, now carrying a note of what might have been confusion. You acknowledge your violation of Imperial sovereignty? I acknowledge that I'm in your space and you want to talk to me. So let's talk. David set his guitar carefully in its case. He had owned the instrument for 15 years. It had traveled to 12 different worlds with him. The wood had absorbed songs from species the Draconids had probably never heard of. If this went badly, he hoped whoever found it would keep playing it. The airlock hissed open. 3 Draconid soldiers entered with weapons drawn. They moved with absolute precision, covering every angle, their reptilian faces blank of expression. David noticed their eyes, though. Eyes always told the truth, no matter how well someone controlled the rest of their face. These soldiers were uncertain, confused. They had expected weapons, defiance, fear, something that made sense. David raised his hands slowly and smiled. Welcome to the Odyssey. Sorry about the mess. I'm David. The lead soldier stared at him. David could see the being processing what it was seeing. A human, alone, unarmed, showing all his teeth in what humans called a smile, but what looked like a threat display to most species. Yet every other signal David gave off read as non-threatening. The contradiction clearly bothered the soldier. "You will come with us," the soldier finally said. "Do not attempt to flee or resist." "Wouldn't dream of it." David lowered his hands, but kept them visible. "Mind if I bring my guitar? It's basically my whole life in a wooden box." The soldiers exchanged glances. Guitar. The translation matrices in their helmets had provided the word, but no context. One soldier moved forward and scanned the instrument case. Finding no weapons or explosives, it gave a sharp nod. "You may bring it." They escorted David through corridors of dark metal that hummed with power. Other draconids stopped and stared as the human walked past. David nodded to each one, still smiling. Some looked away. Others continued staring with undisguised confusion. By the time they reached the interrogation chamber, David had counted 17 different draconids, and not one had shown anything resembling emotion on their faces, but their eyes. Their eyes were alive. The interrogation chamber was exactly what David expected. Boros. Harsh lighting. A single chair in the center. No windows. Designed to make prisoners feel small and helpless. He sat down without being asked and set his guitar case beside him. "Comfortable," he said to the guard standing by the door. "Nice acoustics, too. Bet sound carries really well in here." No response. Of course not. They were statues. Beautiful, powerful, tragic statues. Hours passed. David waited patiently. He had learned patience from music. Every song had its tempo. Rushing never helped. Finally, the door opened again, and a different draconid entered. This one wore robes instead of armor and carried itself with unmistakable authority. "I am Rendax, chief advisor to Emperor Varroque the Eternal. You have violated Imperial space. Explain your purpose or face execution as a spy." David looked up at the towering figure. Rendax had to be at least 8 feet tall, scales the color of old copper, eyes like molten gold, completely terrifying, completely in control, and completely, utterly lonely. David could see it in the microscopic tension around Rendax's eyes. The way he held himself. This being had buried something so deep that he had forgotten it was there. "My name is David Reed," he said simply. "I'm from Earth. I came to share songs." Rendax blinked. Just once. But it was enough. Songs, music, organized sound, patterns of notes and rhythms that express what words can't. David kept his voice gentle. "Non threatening. I've been traveling for 2 years, visiting different worlds, playing for anyone who wants to listen. Your people's transmissions reached me 6 months ago. I followed them here. Our transmissions are encrypted military communications. Not those transmissions. The other ones. The patterns. The organized sound waves that your ships put out in specific sequences." David leaned forward slightly. "At first I thought they were just engine harmonics. But the patterns repeat with variations. They're deliberate. Beautiful, actually. Like music that forgot it was music." Rendax went very still. Dangerously still. "You speak nonsense. Maybe. Or maybe your people used to sing and forgot how." David stood slowly, keeping his movements calm. "Look, I'm not a spy. I'm not a soldier. I'm just someone who believes music matters. That connection matters. If you want to kill me for that, okay. But before you do, would you let me play something? Just one song. Then you can decide." The request was so absurd that Rendax actually seemed thrown. His perfect mask of control slipped for just a moment. David saw a flash of something underneath. Curiosity, maybe, or hunger, or fear. "This matter will be decided by the Emperor himself," Rendax finally said. "He has requested your presence." David picked up his guitar case. "Then let's go meet him." The throne room stretched upward like a canyon carved from black glass. Varroque sat at the far end, a figure of such immense presence that David's breath caught despite his determination to stay calm. The Emperor was easily twice the size of the soldiers who had captured him. Ancient scars marked scales that looked like they could turn away starship weapons. Eyes that held the weight of millennia fixed on David as he walked forward. Every instinct screamed at David to run. This was a predator, an apex being who had conquered solar systems. But David had learned long ago that instinct and truth were different things. He kept walking until he stood in the center of the vast chamber, his guitar case held loosely in one hand. Silence filled the space like deep water. David waited. Rushing this moment would ruin everything. "You claim to create organized sound," Varroque finally said. His voice resonated through the chamber, through David's chest, through his bones. "Demonstrate." Not a request, a command. David nodded and knelt to open his case. The latches clicked loudly in the quiet. He lifted out his guitar, feeling its familiar weight settle into his hands. The wood was warm, alive, ready. "What you call organized sound, we call music," David said. He sat cross-legged on the floor, guitar across his lap. "It's how humans express what's inside us. Joy, sorrow, love, fear, all the things we feel but can't quite say with words. Emotion." Varroque spoke the word like it was toxic. "Your species allows such weakness? We call it strength." David's fingers found the strings. "May I?" Varroque gestured once. Permission granted, David began to play. Not anything complex, just a simple melody. An old folk song from Earth about wind moving through trees. His fingers moved across the frets while his other hand strummed gently. The notes rose into the air, bouncing off the black glass walls, filling the chamber with something it had never held before: sound. Pure sound, organized and deliberate and alive. He watched Varroque as he played. The Emperor sat motionless, but David had learned to read beings through their stillness. He saw the minutes shift in Varroque's posture, the way his clawed hands tightened on the armrests of his throne, the way his eyes widened just slightly, as if seeing something that should not exist. David finished the first song and moved into another. This one was faster, happier, a dance tune from a human colony world. His fingers flew across the strings, creating rhythms that made you want to move, to tap your feet, to remember what it felt like to be joyful. Then he shifted again. Slower now, sadder, a lament he had written after his wife died. The notes carried grief, but also acceptance, also gratitude for what had been. The guitar sang of love that endured beyond loss, of memory that honored rather than buried. Varroque made a sound. Small, almost inaudible, but in the perfect acoustics of the throne room, David heard it. A catch in the Emperor's breathing, a tremor in perfect control. David played 3 more pieces, each different, each expressing something specific. Finally, he let the last note fade into silence and looked up at the Emperor. Varroque had not moved, but something had changed. His eyes looked different, haunted, aware. "What have you done?" The Emperor's voice was barely above a whisper. "I played music," David said simply. "That's all. Just music. I felt." Varroque stopped, started again. There was something inside, something I had forgotten existed. David set his guitar down carefully and stood. That's what music does. It reaches past all the walls we build, past logic and control and fear. It touches what's real underneath. This is forbidden. Varroque rose from his throne, even standing at his full height, rage and confusion warring in his expression. He looked somehow vulnerable. Emotion weakens, destroys. The Empire exists because we eliminated such corruption from our nature. Did you, though? David kept his voice gentle. Or did you just bury it so deep you forgot it was there? You understand nothing. Varroque descended the steps from his throne, each footfall shaking the floor. He stopped a few feet from David, towering over the human. "I have ruled for 3,000 years. I have conquered species beyond counting. I have achieved perfection through the elimination of weakness. And you, a creature of nothing, dare to suggest I am incomplete?" David held his ground. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just a guy who plays guitar. But yeah, Your Majesty, I think you're incomplete. I think you're lonely. I think you spent 3,000 years being exactly what your empire needed you to be, and somewhere along the way you forgot who you actually were." Varroque could have killed him with one swipe of his massive claws. Instead, the Emperor stood frozen, staring down at this fragile being who refused to show proper fear. Play again, Varrock said. What? Play. Again. The Emperor's voice cracked slightly. I commanded. David picked up his guitar and played. This time he chose something different. A piece about hope. About finding light in darkness. About the courage it took to feel anything at all in a universe that could be so cruel. Varrock closed his eyes. His hands trembled. And for the first time in 3,000 years, Emperor Varrock the Eternal felt tears forming that he did not understand them, did not know what they meant. But as the music washed over him, as David's guitar sang of things buried and things forgotten and things that refused to die, no matter how deeply they were hidden, Varrock felt something crack inside his chest, not break. Crack. The first split in a dam that had held for millennia. Stop, he whispered. Then louder. Stop. David's hands stilled. The music died. Silence rushed back in like a flood. Varrock opened his eyes, looked at his hands. They were shaking. Impossible. He had not shaken since he was a youngling. Before the conditioning. Before he became emperor. Before he became a machine. What are you? He asked David. Just human. David smiled. Sad. Understanding. Just someone who knows what it's like to bury pain so deep you forget you're in agony. Varrock stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a voice that held 3,000 years of loneliness, he said, Teach me. 17 days had passed since David first played for Varrock. 17 days since the Emperor had spoken those two words that changed everything. Teach me. Now David sat in quarters that overlooked the capital city, watching the twin suns set over crystalline spires, preparing for another evening with the most powerful being in known space who was slowly remembering how to feel that the chime announced Varrock's arrival. The Emperor entered through doors that barely accommodated his massive frame. He looked tired. David had learned to read the subtle signs. The way Varrock held his shoulders, the shadows under his eyes. Waking up after 3,000 years of sleep was exhausting. You are well? Varrock asked. He had started asking that question 5 days ago, checking on David's well-being without being commanded to do so. Small progress, but progress. I'm good. You? David set aside the book he had been reading. Human literature. He had been sharing stories with Varrock, teaching him about Earth through fiction. I am uncertain. Varrock settled onto the reinforced floor. In these private meetings, he no longer used furniture. Sitting on the ground made him feel less like an emperor and more like what he was slowly becoming. A person. Last night I dreamed. Of my mother. David went still. This was new. Tell me about her. She sang to me when I was young. Before the conditioning began. Before they taught me that feeling was weakness. Varrock's voice carried wonder and pain in equal measure. I had forgotten. 3,000 years. And I had forgotten my mother sang. What did she sing about? Stars. She sang about stars being the scales of the great serpent who created the universe. Each scale a world. Each world a life. It was not true, of course. We know now that stars are merely fusion reactions. Planets are accidental coalescence of matter. But the song was beautiful. The memory of her voice is beautiful. David smiled. Truth and beauty aren't always the same thing. Sometimes beauty is its own kind of truth. They sat together in comfortable silence. This too was new. Varrock had spent millennia surrounded by subjects who spoke only when commanded. David simply existed beside him, present but demanding nothing. It was the strangest gift anyone had ever given the Emperor. Rindax came to me today, Varrock said eventually. He is concerned. Says I spend too much time with you. Says the council whispers that I am being corrupted. Are you? Varrock considered the question seriously. I do not know. What I'm becoming feels different from what I was. But corruption suggests deterioration. I do not feel I am deteriorating. I feel I am waking up. Then Rindax is scared of you being awake. Probably because he's scared to wake up himself. He serves the Empire faithfully. I'm sure he does. But faithfully serving something and actually living are different things, aren't they? Varrock's claws scraped against the floor. A nervous gesture. He had not had nervous gestures 17 days ago. I have been reviewing imperial policies, conquest protocols, subjugation procedures, things I approved without question for millennia. He paused. David, I have done terrible things. There it was. The moment David had been waiting for and dreading. The moment when Varrock truly saw what he had been. What he had done. Yeah, David said quietly. You have. How do I? Varrock struggled with words. How do I carry this? How do I exist knowing what I have done while feeling nothing? Millions dead by my command. Species enslaved. Worlds burned. I felt nothing. I was a machine of conquest, and I felt nothing. You feel now. Yes. And it is agony. David moved to sit beside the massive emperor. Tiny human next to ancient dragon. That's the price, I think. The price of being alive. You get to feel joy and love and beauty, but you also get to feel guilt and shame and grief. Can't have one without the other. Then perhaps it was better when I felt nothing. Was it? David looked up at Varrock. Were you really better? Or were you just safe? Varrock had no answer. They sat together as the suns finished setting and the city lights began to glow. Somewhere out in that city, millions of draconids lived their carefully controlled lives. Feeling nothing, wanting nothing, being nothing but cogs in an imperial machine. I asked you to teach me, Varrock said finally. You have taught me to feel. Now, teach me what to do with what I feel. I can't teach you that. Only you can figure it out. Then what use are you? The question held no anger. Just confusion. David laughed softly. I'm not useful. I'm just here. That's kind of the point. You spent 3,000 years surrounded by useful things. Tools, weapons, servants. You've never had someone who was just there, who gave a damn about you as a person instead of as an emperor. Varrock looked at David for a long moment. Then, awkwardly, uncertainly, he extended one massive claw. David understood. He reached out and placed his small hand against Varrock's palm. The gesture was simple, meaningless to anyone watching. But to two beings learning to trust each other across a gulf of species and experience, it meant everything. I have decided something, Varrock said. Tomorrow I will address the council. I will announce reforms, beginning with the outlying systems. Greater autonomy, reduced tribute requirements. Eventually, full independence for those who wish it. They'll fight you on that. I know. Rindax has already begun preparing counterarguments. The military council will see it as weakness. The economic advisors will call it collapse. Varrock's eyes glowed in the darkness. But I am emperor. My word is law, and my word is that this empire was built on my emptiness. Perhaps it is time to see what we can build on something else. David squeezed Varrock's claw gently. You're going to lose people. Draconids who can't handle the change. Some will hate you. Some will leave. Some will try to stop you. I know. You're still going to do it. Varrock nodded slowly. My mother sang to me about stars being scales on the great serpent. She was wrong about the science, but she was right about what mattered. That the universe is not just matter and energy. That there is beauty. That beauty is worth singing about. He looked at David. If I am to honor her memory, I must change. And if I change, the empire must change. Or I must stop being emperor. Or, David said quietly, you figure out what it means to be an emperor who actually feels. Who rules not from coldness, but from understanding. That's harder, though. Way harder. Yes. Varrock stood, his decision made. Tomorrow we begin. Tonight. Will you play for me? The song about hope. I wish to hear it again. David picked up his guitar and began to play. The Imperial Council chamber erupted in chaos. Rindax stood at his position, struggling to maintain composure while around him, advisors abandoned 3,000 years of emotional control. They did not shout. Draconids did not shout. But their voices rose in sharp, clipped tones that conveyed shock and fury just as clearly. Varrock sat on his throne, watching them fall apart. He felt calm. Strange. For the first time in his reign, watching his council lose control did not trigger contempt. Instead, he felt something almost like compassion. They were terrified. He understood terror now. Your eternal majesty, I must protest in the strongest possible terms. General Thrakos, commander of the Imperial fleet, stepped forward. His scales had flushed dark with barely suppressed rage. To grant independence to conquered systems is to invalidate every sacrifice made in building this empire. It is madness. It is mercy, Varrock replied simply. The word landed like a physical blow. Mercy, a concept the Empire had systematically eliminated from its vocabulary. Several council members actually stepped backward. Rindax found his voice. Eternal One, please. Consider what you propose. The Empire maintains order through strength, through absolute authority. To show weakness now invites catastrophe. Systems that perceive us as soft will rebel. Enemies will see opportunity. Everything we have built will collapse. Perhaps. Varrock descended from his throne. The council parted before him like water. Or perhaps what we built was a cage. Beautiful, efficient, absolute, but still a cage. This is the human's influence, Thrakos said. He has corrupted you with his emotional poison. Varrock turned to face the general. For a moment, the old emperor surfaced. The one who had ruled with absolute zero tolerance for dissent. Thrakos flinched despite himself. Then Varrock did something unprecedented. He smiled. Not a predator's smile. A genuine expression of warmth. David has given me nothing but honesty and music. The corruption, as you call it, was already inside me. Inside all of us. We simply buried it so deeply we forgot it existed. I will not serve an emperor who has been weakened by sentiment, Thrakos declared. Around him, several military officers moved to stand beside him. A show of solidarity. A challenge. Varrock felt his heart rate increase. Felt the ancient instincts of dominance and violence surge. 3,000 years of conditioning demanded he crush this challenge immediately. Publicly. Brutally. Make an example that would ensure no one else dared question him. But he also felt something new. He felt sadness. These officers had served loyally for centuries. They were not evil. They were products of the same system that had created him. They genuinely believed emotion was weakness, because that was what they had been taught. Would have been carved into their souls the same way it had been carved into his. Then you are free to leave, Varrock said quietly. Any who wish to depart may do so. Take ships. Take supplies. Find a system beyond imperial space and build what you believe is right. I will not stop you. The chamber went absolutely silent. Thrakos stared at Varrock as if the Emperor had suggested breathing vacuum. You would allow us to leave? To take military vessels and simply go? Yes. This is a trick. A test. It is a choice. Varrock spread his hands. Stay and be part of what comes next. Leave and build your own future. But I will not rule through fear anymore. I will not maintain order by crushing dissent. If the Empire cannot exist without terror, then perhaps it should not exist at all. Renax made a small sound, almost a whimper. Eternal One, please. Do not do this. The Empire is everything. Without it, we are nothing. Varrock looked at his oldest advisor. Really looked at him. Saw the fear beneath the control. The desperation. The certainty that everything he had built his identity around was crumbling. You are not nothing, Rindax. You are brilliant, dedicated, capable. You are more than your function, more than your service. Varrock's voice softened. When did we forget that? When did we decide that being useful was the same as being alive? Rindax stopped. Started again. I did not know how to be anything else. Then learn. As I am learning. A voice spoke from the back of the chamber. Young, uncertain, your eternal majesty, if I may. Varrock looked. A junior analyst. Someone so low in the hierarchy that she should never speak in council. Your name? Syrah, Eternal One. I have been studying the human's music, the patterns, the mathematics of emotion. She stepped forward, trembling but determined. What if we could teach it? Create academies. Allow our people to choose whether to feel or remain as they are. Several council members hissed in outrage. But Varrock felt something else. Hope. Continue, he said. The Emperor's transformation demonstrates that emotion can coexist with intelligence, with power, with purpose. Syrah's voice grew stronger. What if our strength has always been our ability to control ourselves? Not to eliminate feeling, but to master it? To choose when to feel and when to focus? That would be true power. Varrock turned to Renax. What do you think? His chief advisor looked torn, struggling. Finally, it is not entirely without merit. If we could maintain discipline while allowing controlled emotional expression, we might achieve both strength and, he struggled with the word, and satisfaction. Then let us try. Varrock addressed the full council. Those who wish to leave may do so with honor. Those who stay will help build something new. Not weak, not chaotic, but alive, truly alive. Thrakos and his officers stood frozen. This was not how challenges to imperial authority were supposed to end. There was supposed to be punishment, violence, order restored through force. Instead, they've been given freedom, choice. It was more terrifying than any threat. I will consider your offer, Eternal One, Thrakos finally said. But I do not trust this change. I do not trust emotion. I do not trust that you remain the emperor we need. That is fair, Varrock replied. I am not certain I remain who I was. But I am certain I cannot continue being what I was. Not anymore. The council dispersed slowly. Some angry, some confused, some curious. Rindax remained behind. This will not be easy, he said. No. Many will resist. Some violently. Yes. You could still change your mind. Return to how things were. Varrock thought of David, of music, of his mother's voice singing about stars, of 3,000 years of perfect, empty order. No, he said, I could not. Not anymore. 3 months transformed the empire in ways no one could have predicted. David stood on the balcony of his quarters, watching the city below pulse with something it had never held before. Life. Real life. Music drifted up from the streets where draconids gathered in groups, learning instruments, sharing songs, discovering what it meant to create something beautiful instead of merely functional. Not everyone embraced the change. Riots had broken out in 4 systems. Thrakos and his followers had taken 12 warships and disappeared into uncharted space, promising to return when the Empire came to its senses. But others had stayed, learned, grown. The door opened behind him. Varrock entered, and David smiled at how different the Emperor looked now. Still massive, still powerful, but softer somehow. His eyes held warmth instead of cold fire. His movements carried grace instead of mechanical precision. The first Cultural Academy opens tomorrow, Varrock said. He joined David at the balcony, looking down at his changing empire. Sira has trained 200 instructors. They will spread throughout Imperial space, teaching any who wish to learn. How do you feel about that? David had learned to ask that question. Varrock needed practice identifying his own emotions. Terrified, hopeful, uncertain, proud. Varrock considered, is it normal to feel so many things at once? Completely normal. David leaned against the railing. Welcome to being alive. They stood together in comfortable silence. David had realized weeks ago that he loved this being. Not romantically, something deeper. The love of watching someone discover themselves. The love of witnessing transformation. The love of friendship that crossed species and history and every logical boundary. There is news, Varrock said eventually, from the outer systems. The Pelian people, the ones we conquered 2 months before you arrived. They have sent a delegation. They wish to speak with me. About independence? Yes. And reparations. They want me to acknowledge what the Empire did to them. To apologize. Varrock's claws tightened on the railing. I do not know if I can face them. The guilt is substantial. David put his hand on Varrock's arm. You'll face them because you have to. Because that's what being awake means. You don't get to hide from what you did anymore. Will you come with me? No. David said it gently, but firmly. This is your work. Your responsibility. Your redemption. I can't do it for you. Varrock nodded slowly. You are right. Of course you are right. I'm not always right. I'm just honest. It's the same thing, I think. Varrock turned to face David fully. You are leaving soon. It was not a question. David had been preparing his ship for departure. They both knew this moment was coming. Yeah, 2 days probably. There are other systems out there. Other species who might need what I bring. I can't stay forever. I understand. Varrock's voice held sadness, but also acceptance. I wish I could keep you here. My friend, my teacher, the one who saw what I could be when I had forgotten myself. You'll be fine without me. Better than fine. You've got Rendax, who's slowly figuring out that feeling things doesn't make him weak. You got Syrah and the other young ones who are excited about this new empire. You've got millions of people ready to learn and grow and change. David smiled. You don't need me anymore. And that's good. That means I did my job. Your job was to share music. My job was to remind people that beauty matters. That connection matters. That you could be strong and still feel deeply. David looked out at the city. You got the message. Now you get to share it yourself. Baroque made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. I am 3,000 years old. I have conquered galaxies. I have unmade civilizations with a word. And I am terrified of you leaving. That's love, David said simply. That's what it feels like when you care about someone and have to let them go anyway. I hate it. Yeah, it's awful. But also kind of beautiful, right? That you can feel it at all. Baroque was quiet for a long moment. Then, will you play for me? One last time? Before you go. David had been expecting this request. He went inside and returned with his guitar. But this time, he did not play alone. He sat beside Baroque and began a simple melody. Then he nodded to the Emperor. Your turn. Baroque opened his mouth and sang. His voice was rough, unpracticed, uncertain, but it was also beautiful, deep and resonant, and absolutely genuine. David wove guitar notes around the Emperor's voice, supporting but not leading. This was Baroque's song, his voice, his story. Below in the streets, Draconid stopped and looked up. Their Emperor was singing. The Eternal One, the Perfect One, the machine who had ruled for 3 millennia. He was singing like a person, like a being who felt joy and sorrow and hope and fear. And slowly, hesitantly, other voices joined him. Young Draconids who had been attending the new cultural classes. Old ones who remembered songs from before the conditioning became absolute. They sang together, creating something that had not existed in this empire for thousands of years. Harmony, not forced, not mandated, but chosen. David let the last notes fade and set his guitar down. You don't need me to teach you anymore. You're already teaching yourself and teaching others. Then I release you, Baroque said formally, with gratitude beyond measure, with friendship beyond species, with hope that you find others who need what you bring. And I leave you with this. David held out his guitar. Keep it. Play it. Remember that the universe is bigger and stranger and more beautiful than any empire could contain. Baroque took the instrument carefully in his massive claws. It looked absurdly small in his hands. Perfect point 2 days later, David's ship lifted from the capital world. Baroque stood on his balcony, watching it rise into the sky. In his hands, he held the guitar. Around him, his empire transformed itself through pain and hope in the slow, difficult process of waking up that he raised the instrument and played. The notes were clumsy, wrong in places, but real, absolutely real. And across the city, across the planet, across the empire, Draconids heard their emperor's music and remembered what it meant to be alive.